So let me see if I can bring in Mr. Madison County himself.
Hey, how's it going?
We're going to try not overlap firing millions of questions at you. So, but firstly, welcome. Thank you for giving us the time to interrogate you and chat about your films and movies and stuff like that. So.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm honored you want to talk to me.
We have on the show Stu Miller, who is Cryptic Tadpole, that is him. And we also have one of your biggest fans, Eric, Lauren Becca Reid.
Hey, how's it going?
Eric, lovely to have you on the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
So, Lauren, let's talk Contracted. What have you got to say to Eric about Contracted?
Yes, well, let's talk Contracted indeed. First off, I just want to thank you, Stuart, for actually introducing me to Eric. Eric, I have you on Facebook. It's a pleasure. But I reviewed your film for my YouTube, and you were kind enough to leave a wee comment on there, and I got very, very excited because you're actually the first director to ever write to me thanking me for reviewing the film. So that was great.
Well, thank you again for reviewing it. I appreciate that.
No problem. No, I absolutely loved Contracted. Thought that it was absolutely brilliant. And I hear as well from you writing on Facebook, you're planning a sequel.
That's it's kind of up in the air right now. I mean, I've definitely been approached to make a sequel. I'm not sure if it will get made or what's going to happen with it, because unfortunately, those decisions are a little above my pay grade. But yeah, so far I've been asked to come up with an idea for a sequel, and I came up with something that I felt confident about and passionate about. So I put the ball in the powers that be's court, so to speak, and I'm what happens from there will be in their control.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully, and congratulations on the success of Contracted, for them to even talk about making a sequel. That's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I when we set out to make the movie, I had no idea that one, people would respond to it as much as they have, and two, that anyone would even want to see a sequel, because I certainly didn't make it with the intention of planning for a sequel. But thankfully, I left enough shoes untied to where I still have some room to grow.
Absolutely. Like, with the way the first one ended, and even with the way it began, the sort of vague story that you're following right from the beginning as to the mysterious man at the house party, I mean, there is so much potential for a sequel. Like, even to go on past the sequel, I mean, the questions that you're left asking by the end of the first one are just crazy. You have so much potential, as I said,
awesome.
to actually go on and create a series. So that's what, I would absolutely love to see a sequel. It would be perfect. But I have another question for you, Eric. I'd love to know, what were the horror films, what sort of films did you grow up watching that made you think, wow, I want to grow up and I want to become a director. I want to do that for a living.
It's weird. It kind of happened in three different phases. The first phase was when I was very young, around the age of 4. I was just kind of exposed to a lot of genre films, and not all of them were necessarily in the horror genre, so to speak. Like, I can remember the first movies I ever saw were horror films, and they were things like Stephen King's It, and the original Night of the Living Dead, and the original Fright Night, and Near Dark, and Lost Boys. A lot of vampire movies for some reason. Yeah. But my father was a big movie fan in general. Like, I grew up on a lot of early Tim Burton movies like Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands, and I just naturally gravitated towards darker movies. And then second phase was in the mid 90s when Scream came out. I remember being just a kid. I was less than 10 years old, and I remember seeing Scream in the movie theater. And that was the first time that I ever became aware that that the movie was impacting affecting the audience, so to speak. And that was the first time while watching the film I realized that the audience was having a response. Like, up until that time, I'd always watched the movie and I was scared, and I knew I was scared, and I liked that feeling, but it was the first time that I was aware that other people were having that experience, if that makes sense. And so that was the first time that I it became conscious to me that I wanted to tell stories or entertain people. And so from that point on, I started, where I grew up, it is a very conservative area, and they don't show a lot of dark films or scary movies or things like that. So I would have to tell all my friends about the movies that I was seeing. And then, you know, when they finally got their chance to see the movie, they would always tell me that my version of me telling it to them was better than the film itself. So that was the first time I kind of realized that I had a knack for storytelling. And then the third phase of it was when I was in high school, and I was, you know, in my mid-teens, and I was watching a lot of movies, and I was at that place where I was getting ready to go to college, and I needed to decide what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study. And, you know, I really wanted to write novels. I wanted to be like Stephen King, because I wanted to write books that got turned into movies, because I didn't know how to make movies. And then, you know, somewhere along the way, I kind of realized that I could just kind of skip the whole writing the book and hoping someone would turn it into a movie, and just make the movie myself. And that's when I started watching a lot of like special features on DVDs, and researching a lot and reading a lot of books. And actually Eli Roth's film Cabin Fever was around that time, and I watched the behind the scenes on the DVD, and it looked like they had so much fun making it, and it was very reminiscent of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Evil Dead, and that was honestly the first movie that made me want to go out and make my own film. Like, after seeing how much fun they had on the you know, the DVD making their film, it made me say, I want to grab a camera, I want to go out in the middle of nowhere with my friends and a bucket of blood and make a cool movie, hopefully entertain people. So that's kind of you know, in a nutshell, how it happened all together. It was kind of those three phases that ultimately pushed me into wanting to make my own films.
That's great. That's really great. And you, of course, got started. Was it with all your short films, such as Trick or Treater, that you started off with then?
No, actually. I went to film school, and I had a horrible experience at film school, because they taught me how to not make a movie. They taught me how to do everything by the book. You know, when you're making genre films, especially, you have to break all the rules, and you have to, you know, not take no for an answer. And so I only made short films in film school, and then as soon as I got out of film school, I jumped straight into making features. I was ready to make a feature from day one. I didn't want to waste my time with short films. Not that they're bad. It's just I personally don't think I'm that great of a short film storyteller, because I like character development. I like to you know, stretch out the story and put little details in there. And when you're doing a short film, you have to really hammer it home, and there's no room for subtlety. And like you said about Contracted, like, I like to be vague and subtle with certain story elements. And in a short film, you kind of have to just hammer it over the head and get it all as tight as you can. So naturally, I just gravitated towards the longer form of filmmaking. And so right after film school, I made this experimental feature film with my friends called Hostile Encounter that I paid for entirely by myself, and we shot it in 5 days. And I showed it to some of my friends, and they were really impressed with what we had done with no money. And you know, one of them came to me and said, hey, if I could get you, you know, a little chunk of money, not a lot, but, you know, if I got you a little bit of money, would you want to make a movie that you don't pay for, and that, you know, we potentially sell to, you know, put in theaters and get on DVD? And that ultimately became Madison County, which was my first movie. And then I had so much fun making Madison County that shortly after, we finished shooting Madison County in like September, and in October, when I got back to LA, I was just itching to get behind the camera again. And my friends and I came up with this idea of doing these little Halloween short films, and we shot it right after Madison County. We shot the first one. I was going to do one every year, but I didn't do one last year, so I'll have to catch back up and do the Trick or Treater Part 3 this year. But I actually didn't start doing short films until after I started making my features. And it was really just a way to kind of keep the family together, so to speak, because the people that I make movies with are such great people. And you know, I don't really consider them coworkers. They're just my friends. You know, we're all friends, and we make movies together. So anytime we can be on set doing what we love is a great time.
Yeah, one of the first guests I had on one of my sort of earlier movie shows was obviously somebody who was in Madison County, Mr. Ace Marrero.
Oh, I love it.
And
Ace is great.
He spoke very highly of you at the time, and he was talking all about this project, Madison County, and then Roadside. And so that's when I first picked up on your name, was through chatting with Ace.
Oh, cool.
And I've sort of followed your career ever since. So.
Oh, well, awesome. Yep. Well, shout out to Ace, because Ace is amazing, and Ace has been a longtime collaborator of mine. We met in film school, actually. He was in my first short film, which was like this killer clown movie that was just absurd. And and we had such a great time making it, and we just bonded. And yeah, like the beginning of my filmmaking journey was very much, with Ace and kind of the co-pilot seat. So Ace has been along for the journey ever since.
Fantastic. I know he enjoys that journey as well. So
yeah. Same to him.
Definitely. Madison County, I checked out as soon as it was available on DVD. Ace sort of sent me a DVD of it, which I've got here. Lovely autograph, whatnot.
Oh, cool.
And I actually have an autographed Madison County poster on my wall.
Oh, nice.
Signed by yourself.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, also courtesy of Ace. So,
nice.
Yep. Big fan. Very excited to hear that there's a sequel in development for that one.
Oh yeah. That's been in kind of a while. I don't think I ever publicly announced it. I think people were asking me if I ever had plans to do a sequel, and I told them that I have a couple of ideas on how to do the sequel, and really it's just going to come down to timing and what I want to do. But it's crazy because as time goes on, you kind of distance yourself from what you've done in the past. It's kind of like when you look back at your old school photos and you think, what was I wearing? Why was I acting like that? I kind of look at Madison County that way, and as proud of that film as I am, I look at it and I'm like, oh man, what was I thinking? So whenever I get around to doing a sequel, if I ever get the chance, I may have to just almost completely revamp it and just bring it up to hopefully what my level is now.
Well, on the subject of Contracted as well, I finished watching that probably about 2 hours ago, and my partner Annette, she said, when you speak to Eric, tell him that film was amazing.
Oh wow!
So,
tell us thank you.
She loved it. She is the parent to several daughters, and she wants to sit them down and show them that film, so they never go out again.
I'm glad I'm being implemented as part of people's parenting tactics. That's amazing.
Yes, yeah, definitely. They will be showing Contracted in schools. Yeah, they should do.
I hope so.
So yeah, and Stu, you had a really, really good question about the actual horror genre, didn't you? Eric.
Well, we were going to speak about it in the show before we were interviewing Eric, and it was just last month. Regarding all the award ceremonies that's around, so the Oscars, the BAFTAs, things like that, the Golden Globes, it got me thinking: why is horror such a genre that is completely sort of to one side? We do have places like Screamfest and Fright Fest and places like that, which is just specifically for the horror community. But you need to be a fan to know about those kind of things. Why is horror such an underused media? Why is it a media that's known as the brutal term, the bastard child? It is the child who is just forgotten about. It's a genre that when you say that you're a horror fan, you just get that your nose put up against you. The fact that I don't want to speak to you because you like people getting ripped apart, etc. Why do you think a lot of society just dismisses horror?
I think honestly because it reminds, it's one of those things. I think old habits die hard. When horror films were first becoming more and more popular, they were almost seen as kind of like heavy metal music or something. They were something that the parents didn't want their kids to watch. And I think that stigma has always stuck around because of what you said, because most people associate horror films with murder and violence and rape and exploitation. So they feel that it's below, the typical art form, which in my opinion, it's really not. It's all storytelling, it's all, part of the scheme of art, in the grand picture. So it's really just a different type of art. It's no different. I've seen some dramas, that are more gruesome than horror films just because of the subject matter, so I think horror gets kind of a bad rap, especially, when it comes to the artistry in the making of it, because especially on the filmmaking side and the acting side, in front of and behind the camera, there's really no one set emotion that horror films kind of stick to. You can have people laughing and crying and screaming and fearful, and it runs the gamut of emotions. And I think to effectively pull off all those emotions as a one filmmaker and two an actor is one of the toughest things you can do. And some of the greatest filmmakers of all time have done horror films. Steven Spielberg did Jaws, and Peter Jackson started out with Dead Alive, and then moved on to Oscar-winning films like Lord of the Rings, and Sam Raimi, has had a similar career and a lot of success in Hollywood, and even greats like Martin Scorsese and obviously Alfred Hitchcock is known as the director of the greatest film of all time, which is Vertigo, which a lot of people in the genre community respect as a genre film. So I think genre films get a bad rap, but I'm hoping that as time continues, it will be it'll kind of dilute itself, because we have some incredible, like I personally think James Wan's film The Conjuring is a masterpiece, and if nothing else, should have been nominated for a few technical Academy Awards this year, just because of the effect it had on its audience. The proof is there in the numbers. So I think it's one of those things where it's old habits die hard, and the general population kind of still sees it as a lesser art form and more of a taboo kind of exploitation art form, and kind of an escape from their normal lives, which is fine. It's kind of like a roller coaster, but you don't think of a roller coaster as a legitimate form of entertainment. It's that's for the risk seekers. So I think really it's going to come down to the filmmakers and the audience is kind of meeting halfway in the middle. And I think a big part of it is really the amount of horror films. We have a lot of bad horror movies being made because it's easy to grab a camera and grab a bucket of red-colored syrup and go in the backyard and make a movie with your friends, and a lot of times those movies turn out bad and they get released on DVD. So yeah, I mean, it gets harder and harder to legitimize, an art form when you have people trying to replicate it so much. Like not everyone can go grab, an Academy Award nominated actress and make a sad drama, so that's why there's not as many of those. But, like I said, I think it's really going to come down to the critics kind of recognizing the genre for the stature that it's upholding itself to now, and realizing that it's here to stay, and that sooner or later it's going to have to be recognized. Because if you look at films like not Night of the Living Dead, but Silence of the Lambs and The Sixth Sense, and even The Exorcist and The Shining, they're all made by some of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And some of them were even nominated for Academy Awards and won Academy Awards. So it's like you can't say that horror doesn't belong there, because it does. It's just the critics are kind of picking and choosing what they want to consider, and I don't feel that that's necessarily right. So I think in the future, as the content continues to get greater and greater, I feel that we're going to see a big transition, and hopefully one for the better.
I mean, 10 years ago, everybody was laughing at comic book films, and now you can't even go out your front door without tripping over one, can you? So they're kind of recognized. So
yeah, absolutely.
You just go back to you look at what happened in 2013, and I think it's probably the biggest year of a turnaround when it comes to horror films. Because if you look at films like The Conjuring, it went easily past the $100 million mark in the US box office, and it did brilliantly worldwide. You look at Jason Blum with Blumhouse Productions, and he shoots his films on a budget of around about $7 to $8 million. And they have done brilliantly for him. He's been able to get back 10, 12, 13 times the budget just on the opening weekend, because people are starting to now come around to watching horror films in the cinema rather than just hoping to find a movie that they've never heard of in their local video store and just going home and watching it there. And so it's getting filmmakers to realize, yes, we can release a film in the cinema and it's going to get the audience and the critics will view it. And I think 2013 has helped in that instance. And when you pick that up on James Wan with The Conjuring, I think James Wan is probably one of the biggest influences in that in the last 5 years in horror movies, because all of his films that he's made is getting people's attention. And it has sort of like brought horror back into the forefront as to say, yeah, we're not all about gore. We're about people who've got brilliant imaginations who are struggling to find a way to find an audience to watch our films. And we need them to see it, because this is where intelligence lies rather than stupidity.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. Very, very well put. I think it's very easy for people to forget that there is an art to scaring people. That horror films have to try very, very hard to get past the audiences out there, but just say, oh, it's a horror film. That's not going to scare me. I'm too tough for that. It's really quite a knack to kind of crush that bullshit shell that the audience has, and really reach them and really try to terrify them. And there's a real skill, like obviously, Stuart, you said about how Eric had done such a good job of Contracted and making you uneasy, and it's the same you were discussing James Wan. I mean, he has a real knack of being able to get right to the heart of the story and using that to scare the absolute bejesus out of its audiences. And as I said, there's a real skill to that is very hard to master.
Yeah, especially nowadays, because audiences are so savvy to filmmakers and the attempts of the genre film, because there's so many. And we, even if you're not a horror movie fan, you've seen quite a few horror movies in your lifetime. And, to a certain degree, they become predictable, and how many times can you watch someone walk down a dark hallway, and you have to anticipate the scare, what's going to jump out of the door, what's going to appear behind them. Like, the tricks become old, and so now, especially, like if someone makes a film that resonates with people and that, is successful in affecting them in a mental and psychological way, then I feel that should be rewarded, because we have seen so many films that it's getting tough to scare us. It's that's why we have so many audience members that say, oh, I can't be scared, or it's just another horror film. Like they're not as afraid of it anymore. So you really have to find new ways to kind of keep it interesting and keep it fresh. And that it could be in a million ways. But I agree. I think 2013 was a great year for a lot of not only new filmmakers, but even filmmakers like James Wan, who kind of had films showcased and say, look, there's still a lot of new tricks we can pull and a lot of new stories we can tell. And, I think we're about to see something really cool in terms of the horror genre, and kind of a resurgence, so to speak, of young filmmakers and even established filmmakers that, are just saying, look, every story hasn't been told. We're not part of the Hollywood circle that just wants to remake every movie. Like, there's plenty of new stories to tell. There's plenty of imagination left, and there's plenty of room for all of us to get those stories out there and made. And I think, it's almost going to be kind of like a punk rock kind of movement where, these filmmakers are just saying, fuck it. Like, we're going to make these movies, and we're going to get your attention whether you want us to or not.
Yeah.
I think especially with not the invention of Netflix, but the increase on it, distribution platforms like Netflix and LoveFilm, you're no longer at the mercy of the cinema chains.
Yeah.
If you make a film, there's so many different avenues to get it out nowadays.
Yeah. It's brilliant that we have so many options.
But you were talking about original ways to freak people out, and Lauren touched upon the fact that Contracted freaked me out, because to me that film is 100% real. There's no ghosts in it. There's no boogeymen. There's no weird monsters or whatever. It's a virus, and it's it is a horror film. However, it could happen to pretty much anybody, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
that sort of diseases out there, and that is unnerving beyond belief. Where did sort of genesis of Contracted come from? What first made you think, right, I'm gonna make this project, this is it, I'm gonna start on it now?
It came from what I was talking about, just the need to tell something unique and in a way that I hadn't seen before. I was having a lot of people ask me, what I was going to do next, and if I was going to do another Madison County, or, what I was going to do. And I kept hearing people say, what you need to do is this. Like, I had just people telling me what I should be doing rather than me thinking about what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do a movie that I felt would resonate with audiences and be something that they could identify with. And I've always been interested in using sex as a device to, tell a story, especially a horror story, because it's such an intimate thing, and it's such a relatable act that almost everyone can identify with. So that was really the genesis of just trying to find a way to get under people's skin, no pun intended, and scare them just as much as I could. And really the best way to scare people is to figure out how to get inside their comfort zone without them knowing, and that was kind of where it started. And I'd always had this idea of wanting to do a film, spoiler alert, if you're, listening to this and you haven't seen the film yet, don't listen for this part. But I wanted to do, a zombie movie. I wanted to do a movie that ultimately turns itself into, whether you consider her a zombie at the end of the film or not, is completely irrelevant. That's why, I never say what she is, but I wanted to do a movie that felt like the movies we have seen before, but just done differently, you know, because everyone says, oh, that genre is dead. And, you know, I love Danny Boyle's film, 28 Days Later, because he took a subgenre that was so overused and put something fresh into it, you know. And I wanted to try and do the same thing, but on an opposite side of the scale, and kind of, you know, rather than starting from kind of the end of society, so to speak, I wanted to see it from the beginning.
Well, thank you very much for that film. Anyway, it was amazing. Yeah, it freaked me out no end. And Annette and her daughter watched it, and they were shocked. They loved it, but they were so shocked and freaked out by it. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Fantastic stuff. One of your films that I'm trying to track down. Is it actually out yet? Roadside
has not been released yet. We are actually selling the film internationally, so you guys may actually be seeing it a lot sooner than people in America.
Fantastic, because that's something that Ace spoke about all as many years ago. He touched upon the title, so I've been watching out for that one ever since.
Yeah, that one's a really cool one. It's once again, it's completely different from Madison County and Contracted. It's a completely different type of film, completely different aesthetic, and you know, once again, taking a lot of things that we've seen in horror films and you know, kind of turning them on their head. You know, to be fair to Roadside, though, it's actually not much of a horror film. It's actually more of a dramatic thriller, like a very straightforward film. But it takes a lot of kind of tropes and devices that we've seen in genre films and kind of uses them to its advantage, so to speak. So I'm hoping people catch on to what we try to do in that film as well.
Well, you mentioned you get a lot of people saying, "Oh, Eric, you should do this," and "Eric, you should do that." I think, again, just do whatever you do, and you know, I'm pretty sure I'll watch it. So
I appreciate that.
I look forward to it. So back to you, Lauren.
I'd love to know as well, is there any actors or directors or anyone at all in the film industry that you would love to work with one day, Eric? Like anyone who's been a big influence on your work that you think, wow, I would love to stand beside them on the film set one day?
Yeah, there's several. You know, I love the people I collaborate with. You know, the Ace Moreros, the Matt Mercers, you know, all those people. So it's like I would love to continue working with them. But there's a lot of filmmakers that I genuinely respect, and a lot of actors, you know. And I always blank whenever this question's asked to me. But, you know, James Wan is a friend of mine and someone that I greatly respect, and I would love to, you know, work with him in some capacity eventually someday. There's a lot of filmmakers that I admire, like David Fincher, and Darren Aronofsky, who are, in my opinion, two of the greatest living directors right now. They just tell such incredible stories, and you know, they've mastered their art. You know, I'm a fan of so many filmmakers. It's probably irrelevant to even try to touch upon any of them. But there's a lot of actors out there that I really like as well. A lot of young ones. You know, coming up, like the Chloe Moretz, I'm a big fan of, who was in the new Carrie film. I think she's got a lot of great potential, and there's a lot of you know, I constantly look for actors that are ballsy. Like, even though Shia LaBeouf has kind of been in the spotlight for going nuts lately, I'm a big fan of him and his work with Lars von Trier and the Nymphomaniac films, because, you know, there's just I'm drawn to actors that are fearless, you know, and it's like when I see an actor that's fearless, those are the ones that I really want to work with, because I know that they're going to have no boundaries, you know. So a lot of the actors that I want to work with are a little more obscure, and I'm hoping that we can kind of come up out of obscurity together, so to speak, eventually.
Yeah, well, I can say, if you ever do anything at all with those directors you mentioned, especially James Wan, I will definitely be watching that one.
I appreciate that.
Hopefully one day.
Absolutely.
Another question I would love to ask you, because it's something I find really interesting that I'd love to get a whole lot of different perspectives on, especially whenever, obviously, a man such as yourself, you're in the film industry and you're directing such great films. What's your view on censoring films? Do you think that, obviously, the word art was dropped in by yourself a few times there, do you think that film is, of course, an art form, and do you think that it should ever be censored? Even, you know, you look at such extreme films such as Martyrs and films like Hidden in the Woods we had discussed earlier, as well as I Spit on Your Grave, all films with rape and abuse and, you know, horrible things that happen. Do you think any of that should ever be censored, or should art remain art, untouched, and just presented to the world as it is?
You know, my biggest kind of mantra for life is that there's a balance for everything. The artist in me, absolutely, I believe that, you know, film is an art form. And, you know, unfortunately, it's not a very pure art form, because it's not like, you know, drawing or being a musician where you can just pick up an instrument or a tool and play something, and get instant results and instant gratification. Making a film is a long and arduous process that delays gratification. So, you know, along those lines, you know, everything is kind of monitored, so to speak, anyways, you know, by the filmmaker. The filmmaker is constantly censoring his own film. He's cutting, he or she is cutting the takes. They're crafting the performances. It's constantly being molded, you know? So it's like, I feel that movies in general, or film in general, is always being censored, you know, because who's to say, you know, and especially this is something I had to learn, especially when my first film was coming out, that there's no such thing as right or wrong, you know, when it comes to art. There's just yes or no, you know, it's all opinion, you know, no one's opinion is right or wrong when it comes to subject matter. Someone could say that one of my films is the greatest film of all time, and then someone else says that it's the worst film of all time, and who's to say which one is right or wrong, you know? So, the line gets very blurry whenever you look at it that way. But, you know, I do think that to a degree, I think really it's tough to say, because for me, I believe that once again, it's up to the viewer. You know, if a viewer can't handle a certain type of film, then you should just be careful of what you watch. But at the same time, you know, I don't think that we should expose too many negative things, because there's already enough negative things happening in the world. So it really, like I said, is just a balance. But my overall general answer would be that I'm completely fine with seeing bold and edgier films. In fact, I would love to see them. I mean, once again, I just Nymphomaniac, which has penetration in it, and a lot of people are, some people are calling it pornographic, and which it is to a degree, but you know, there are mainstream critics that are giving glowing reviews. So, you know, and it's in movie theaters, you know, around the world. So, you know, I think it's constantly evolving, and there's really no right answer. So, you know, I think it really just comes down to honestly the filmmaker, to be honest with you, and you know, educating the viewer on what they're about to witness, you know, and what they're about to watch. Because I think anyone who goes into a film and they're shocked by the content, then that person didn't really know what they were getting into, and maybe that person should really pick a new hobby, you know, because I'm not going to walk into a movie and witness something that I didn't think was going to be in the film, because that's what it is. It's an experience. Like there are films that I've walked into and I actually didn't really like them, but I will still refer them to my friends and say, you should check out this movie, because it evokes such an emotional response in me. Like, I know if I had problems with the film and I didn't like it for its content, that it somewhere deep down inside to me, it spoke to me in some way, you know, and that's the stuff that I think is the greatest type of art, the type of art that moves you. So, you know, as long as you don't go into a movie like The Notebook and suddenly, you know, Ryan Gosling's raping Rachel McAdams in a very graphic way, and then I think you have a problem. But even still, you know, the side of me that's like, hey, if that's the story the filmmaker's telling, that's the story, you know. But I just think you have to trust the filmmaker, and the filmmaker has to be someone who's being true to his art, you know. But that speaks to, once again, what I said earlier about how everyone can just grab a camera and go make what they want now. So it's tougher to find those films from filmmakers that you trust, that you know you're in good hands for. But, you know, like I said, for me, I really feel that people need to kind of get the sticks out of their asses and just be prepared for what they're going to do. You know, when you go out to a restaurant and you sit down, you expect that meal to be good, but if the food's not good, you know, you're not going to pick up your plate and throw it at the chef, you know. But that's what people do with films. You know, if they don't like a film, they go on Netflix and they hurl insults and death threats at the filmmakers, you know. So it's really just about finding that balance of you know, what's going to work for everyone, which, you know, there's no one size fits all when it comes to art.
Absolutely
I think
not.
the studios wish there was a one size fits all, because then but unfortunately that's all they would churn out then, isn't it? If they worked out the secret recipe to to a movie?
Oh yeah, they've got their equation that they try to make work, but we're constantly breaking it.
Good. Just keep breaking it. Keep smashing that equation.
Absolutely.
I mean, you were touching upon critics and whatnot. I remember just after Madison County came out on DVD and Blu-ray, there was a kid who recorded some sort of YouTube video where he was just really having a pop at your film.
Yeah.
And he's like, don't watch it. I don't know if you remember that kid or not.
Yeah.
And you actually shared that on your Facebook, which I thought was awesome because a lot of filmmakers, they will hide a lot of people whinging and bitching and moaning about the films. But you seem to sort of kind of embrace those very few negative reviews that are out there, and you're like, yeah, whatever, he didn't like it. So you don't seem to hide it. What's the sort of not reasoning behind that, but are you okay with negative feedback as long as it's constructive?
Absolutely. I mean, as a filmmaker, I'm growing. As a storyteller, I'm constantly growing. Even if I reach a status one day of Alfred Hitchcock or something, I still want to believe that I'm learning and growing, and I never want to feel that I've reached as far as I can reach. I never want to stand on top of the mountain and look down. I always want to keep looking up. So if someone has something, constructive to say, I'm all ears. But unfortunately, most of the negative reviews of not just my films, but films out there in general are just so ignorant and uneducated, because it comes down to, I hated this film for this, or I hated this film for that. And once again, this is just my opinion, but, I firmly believe that, when you have an opinion of something, you should at least give an educated response as to what you didn't like and why that didn't work. Like I've had people, watch Contracted and they say, I didn't like the film because you didn't explain this, or you never said what she had, or you never did this. And those are all very valid opinions. But once you realize that that was intentional on my part, you kind of have to understand that, okay, that's what the filmmaker intended. So I need to adjust my opinion as to, okay, I just don't like that type of storytelling, but it worked for this film, or or it didn't work for this film, and give reasonings for supporting. Because one of the things I hate most about critics is when critics say, at least for my films, because I can't speak for other filmmakers, but when someone says one of my movies has a plot hole, that's really upsetting to me, because while they may appear to be plot holes or left unanswered, there's still enough context clues that I put in the film for you to draw a conclusion yourself. You just kind of have to pay close attention and make a decision for yourself, because those are the films that I like, the films that leave me hanging at the end of the film, and I'm like, oh, I get to think about it after it's done, and it's not just, okay, it's done, I can go on with my life. Like, I like when a movie stays with me. So that bothers me when people have kind of I use the word ignorant, but that, because that's as much as I can say about it. It's just an ill-informed or uneducated opinion about it. But, if there is a negative criticism, I'm completely open to it. I would actually prefer a really well thought out negative critique to one of my films, as opposed to just a very bland positive critique or review, because I've gotten very positive reviews that are like, hey, I really liked your film. It looked great. And, great performances. And I'm like, okay, cool. That I appreciate that. But, it's like, as a filmmaker, I'm always going to strive to have my movie look cinematic and my performances to be good. It's like, what in the film did you like? What story patterns, what character arcs, what, I love the detail, it's like, I want to know what worked, what didn't work. So if it's a very well thought out and educated opinion and someone who's obviously put thought into it, I will accept the review, good, bad, or ugly. But usually when it's just very lowbrow and laughable, I like to share, because honestly, I'm not one of those filmmakers that just wants you to think that people just love my films. I make very polarizing films. People either love them or they hate them. So for me, it's like I want people to get a dose of as many opinions as they can, so to speak.
I mean, 100%. Contracted worked because you didn't give a name to the virus. I wasn't watching the film thinking, right, when's he going to tell us what this girl's got? Yeah. I didn't feel the need to know, because all I needed to know was what she's got. I don't want to catch. That's it. That's it. That's all I needed to know. It's like, that's horrible. It's horrific. It's realistic. I don't need to know. I think in some ways, if you had a scene where they went into a doctor's office and he said, this is what you've got, blah, 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 it would take something away from it, because it gives it a name.
Yeah,
I think loved it.
Thank you.
So yes, I would say another 20 minutes would have been brilliant. I could have watched that for longer, but that's not really a bad criticism, is it? Where you're like, give me more.
Yeah, no, I'll take that one all day.
Yeah.
It sort of like leads into the kind of critic that I'm at, because I'm guessing that Stuart and Lauren were really, really scared when I watched the film, and they were thinking, oh, he's going to really hate this film, because I'm brutally honest when it comes to films, because I have my own little show, my own show that I do where I review films, and I'm completely 100% honest when I review a film, because that's, I think, the only way you can be. If you watch a film, you need to be honest. You can't just be up the butthole of the director and say, yeah, that film's fantastic, even though you think it's the biggest piece of shit you've ever sat down and watched. And so I'm guessing that Lauren and Stuart were pretty gone, oh, he's going to hit this film, etc. But I liked it because of the fact that you did leave strands completely unanswered. You did leave the fact that you didn't name the virus. You didn't dwell on scenes that didn't need to be dwelled on. For instance, the rape scene, you didn't dwell on it. And I like the fact that if you see some previous films, a lot of films seem to dwell on them too long, and it dilutes the impact of the scene itself. So I like things like that. I like the way the film was shot as well, and the fact that it didn't have a hectic pace, that it did flow properly, like you wanted to follow the character, you wanted to sort of like be in her shoes in a way. You feel exactly what she's going through, the turmoil that she's going through, the fact that she's discovering the virus through her body and how much it's actually eating at her. And it's not just eating at her body, it's eating at her mind, it's eating at her conscience, it's eating at her family. Her family's breaking down around her, trying to discover what's going on with her. So I like that kind of element of the film itself. And how easy was it for you to actually come up with elements like that in the film? Is it difficult to try and think of how to end a strand without giving too much away?
Really, it came down to just trying to play it as straight as possible. You know, I appreciate that you picked up on the metaphors in the film, because there are obviously a lot. You know, for me, what was so interesting about the film when I came up with the idea was honestly what was happening to her outside of the virus. You know, obviously a lot of people are drawn to what's happening to her body, but for me, it was interesting to see how the people around her reacted to it, because one of the criticisms I've gotten from this film is that a lot of the characters are very unlikable, and I'm completely okay with that, because I didn't set out to make these characters that you fall absolutely in love with. It's like, you know, it's okay to not like some of these characters, and some people don't even like Najar's character, Samantha. They say that she's flawed and she makes stupid decisions, but it's like, that's who she is as a person. She's a very flawed person going through a rough time in her life. So really, for me, I wanted to play it as real as possible. I know people like these characters in this movie, and sometimes life can be tragic, you know, and it's like, what happens when you're in a weird point in your life, when you're in your early to mid 20s and you're trying to figure everything out, and, you know, she's exploring her sexuality, and then this horrible situation happens to her, and then this virus starts to make it worse, and then the more she tries to cover it up, the more it begins to reveal itself. And really, I just kind of looked at the movie as this pressure pot that constantly builds and builds and builds. And, you know, the pacing of the movie starts off very casual, and then as the film progresses, it starts to get faster and faster and faster until the last scene of the movie. If you watch, the entire last scene of the movie is all in one shot, and it's because I wanted you to feel that change in the pace completely with her as she's experiencing it. So, you know, really, I just kind of looked at it like that, like, where would this storyline take us, and you know, where would these people end when they're, you know, kind of on this train? Because basically I looked at the movie as every character was going along for this ride in Samantha's life, but even Samantha wasn't in control of the train. The virus, so to speak, was in control, and it was in the driver's seat. So really, the more reckless I could get towards the end of the film, the more realistic it was. So it was kind of a fun device to play with, because it really allowed me to have no limitations, so to speak, you know, especially since I knew where the film was going to end. Really, it was just about how to make all my scenes work within the symptoms and the storylines that I was presented with, and just make them all move in the same direction. And then ultimately the end of the film was going to end where the majority of the films we've seen in this subgenre begin.
And I like it when something like that happens, where you do end it off where people, after you've seen the film, they've got more questions at the end of the film than actually have during the film. Because you know that when you're watching the film itself, you think to yourself, how's this virus going to affect her? Or how's it going to affect her family? And you get answers to them. But as soon as the film finishes and you think to yourself, you've got miles more questions, and now I want to know more. But the best way to actually do it is to not know more, to not actually get a sequel in a way, because you don't want to find out more. You want to make up your own decisions.
Exactly. That's why I've honestly been very hesitant towards making a sequel. There's a part of me that loves the story idea that I've come up with, but there's also, like I said, when I made the film, I really had no intention of making a sequel. So, you know, I'm gonna be happy either way, to be honest with you. But if I never get to make the sequel, I'll be fine, because that's kind of the way I intended it. But if we do get to make a sequel, then I'm gonna look at it as a way to challenge myself to elevate the film and push it in even more ways that we didn't expect, you know, and find a way to hopefully turn that subgenre on its head even more than we did in the first film.
Tell me more about Riley. You know, that sort of thing. I'm like, I need to see that storyline.
Absolutely. It's funny. Yeah. I'll give you a little hint. If we do a sequel, the sequel will mainly focus on Riley. So So you know, it would be unique, because essentially the sequel would be kind of in the same, you know, world that I created, but it will be you know, kind of this parallel storyline that was running alongside of it. So it will feel familiar enough to where people who enjoyed Contracted will want to see the film, the sequel, but it will be unique and fresh enough to where hopefully they won't feel like it's the same movie over again. And like I said, that's really where, if I do a sequel, I'm going to push myself to really turn expectations on their heads, you know, so people don't feel like they're watching the same film over and over.
And I'm sure you'll do it as well.
Yeah.
So you will manage it. Yep. Talking about Najara Townsend, what an amazing performance she did. Firstly,
yeah, she's great.
'Cause she goes through one hell of a different range of characteristics and behaviors from the opening credits to the end credits. How did you first encounter Najara?
She was brought to me by Matt Mercer, you know, who plays Riley and is also a co-producer on the film. Matt and I were in the middle of casting, and we were just looking for an actress, and Matt had worked with her on a short film before and mentioned her to me, and I said, bring her in. Let's see if she fits. And the moment she walked through the door, there was no question it was going to be her.
She's very well, you know, connected to the part. She really, you know, she wears it well. It's hard to imagine when you see a really strong performance such as that. It's very hard to imagine anyone else in her shoes that could do it quite as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. You know, it's weird because while we were casting it, I was having the hardest time envisioning who I wanted, you know, and I was like, man, who's going to be able to pull this performance off? And you're exactly right. Now that I see the movie and you know, we've gone through this journey together, I can't imagine anyone else's face being plastered all over this film like Najara. She just she completely made the role her own.
She did. Very, very good performance.
So you're on about characters that people didn't like. Not a fan of Nikki character. The character, not the actress. Ooh, but that's the point. You know, you don't need her to be a likable character.
Exactly. That adds to
it. derails it all. If she was nice,
yeah,
it wouldn't work, would it? But I think that's the only main character in that. I'm thinking, oh, I don't like her. But Katie, she was in Madison County as well, wasn't she?
Yeah,
so
she was in Madison County, and she was also in Roadside as well.
Aha! So you have your own little group of people that will follow you.
Yeah,
I kept looking.
I
kept looking for Ace. I kept looking for Ace to pop up in this one. I'm like, is he not? Nope, not there.
Yeah, this was the first one I did without Ace, and it was honestly weird not having Ace on set. But Ace and I have plenty more films in store, hopefully that we're going to be working together on. So I decided to give him a break on this one.
So what sort of horror films really scare you, Eric? What? You know, modern ones that are out, what unnerves you? Because Stu and Lauren and I were chatting. I don't get really scared by the ghosty films or you know, creepy monster type movies. However, slasher movies and the body horror, you know, viruses and whatnot, scare the bejesus out of me. So what unnerves yourself?
Ironically, I think it is the supernatural and the demonic, you know, entity films. Those are the film, like what James Wan was doing with Insidious and The Conjuring, and that's the stuff that really gets me, because I love genre films where there's really no rules, you know, and I like to use this kind of example of like if you're sitting in a living room or you're sitting in a room with a window and there's a killer outside the window, you have to watch that killer get inside the house, or you have to know that killer has to come through that wall to get you. And if you turn around to run away, you just have to hope that killer's not at the next door you run to or something. And there's something scary about that. But what I love about supernatural film, you can see the ghost at the window and you turn to run away, and that ghost can be right behind you when you turn around. And there's no rules, and you get to kind of use your tricks and play with things a little more. And that's what really excites me, is when you can kind of break the rules of reality and kind of, it's a little bit of a cheat, but, for me, I think you kind of have to use that to your advantage. And I think James does a great job of it. And there's a few filmmakers that really understand how to scare people, but that being said, one of my favorite films over the last few years was The Strangers, and that's simply three people breaking into a house, so it really just depends. But I can definitely say that I've definitely been more afraid of supernatural films than anything else. But if I can find a film that's based in reality, that's like a slasher film or a home invasion movie that can scare the shit out of me, I'm all for it.
There's a very good British home invasion movie by a guy called Paul Andrew Williams called Cherry Tree Lane. That's very, very good home invasion movie.
Oh, nice. I've heard of that one. I'll have to check that out.
Stu, can you recommend any films that may give Eric the chills?
Well, I'm sort of like completely 100% desensitized to horror because I've been watching them since the age of 2. So, one of my first films I ever watched was Poltergeist, and the only film that ever unnerved me was Nightmare on Elm Street, because it's just that thought that somebody invading the part of your day where you think that you're more safe is your dreams. You think when you're asleep, that's where you're the most safe, and somebody invading the most safest place is unnerving, and that's probably the last film that's actually managed to do that with me. But I think directors like Guillermo del Toro and Juan Antonio Bayona with things like Pan's Labyrinth, The Orphanage, sort of like really creepy movies that build up Ty West, especially with House of the Devil and things like that. I love these like slow burning movies where there's tension happening and it slowly builds up, and in the last 20 minutes of the film, that's when it's released, and it really starts to build up tension. It's not like the goosebumps on your arm or the hairs on the end of your arms just shoot up. They start to grow slightly, and it's like a plant just growing. And that's the kind of films that I enjoy. So anything by Ty West or Guillermo del Toro or Juan Antonio Bayona is the kind of films that I like.
What about yourself, Lauren? Any recommendations for Eric?
Well, a few recommendations, but I don't know if there's any that could unnerve him, as you put it, given, you've just watched Contracted yourself, so what on earth can you recommend? But I would say, Eric, have you seen Martyrs? It's kind of my go-to film whenever I talk about the more extreme horror films.
Yes, I love Martyrs. In fact, I was recently approached about working on the American remake. So I'm very familiar with the film. I think it's a classic.
American Mary, I think, is a really good modern sort of horror that sort of delves into the sort of the sea of body modification and all the sort of alternative stuff. It's a real sort of alternative horror film, I think, but it's definitely one to be checked out, because obviously with what you've done with Contracted, you're focusing on a naive and flawed, albeit strong female character throughout the whole of Contracted, and it's a very albeit a different plot, obviously it's a very similar thing with American Mary. She starts off at one end of the spectrum, and then throughout the whole film she just completely changes and evolves and turns into a completely different person, and really in a certain way grows into her own skin. And certainly with how the character development worked with Contracted, I think that's one to watch out for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm familiar. The Soska sisters and I've met before, and I've spoken with Tristan, and we could potentially be working on something in the very near future together. So I'm a big fan of American Mary as well.
Wonderful, yeah. Well, I don't know what else to say, because you've probably already seen them, or God, you're one lucky guy, because the Soska sisters are just phenomenal, and I would love to meet them one day and sit them down, or even what would be wonderful if we could get them on the show.
So as an independent filmmaker, Eric, what would you say are the biggest hurdles towards you making films? now, in this sort of day and age? What are the biggest things, and are there any solutions for them that you know about?
It's crazy because I think the biggest hurdle is always kind of the business side of everything, whether it's finding the money to make your movies or finding the right path, because Contracted, when we made the film, Contracted is the smallest film I've ever made, and we made it with literally no money and no time. And, when we got the movie picked up by distribution, IFC is a great distributor. They're a bigger distributor than what I've ever had before, but they're still not, a major studio. So they're more of like a boutique distributor. And, with that, it was really kind of a question of how many people would see the film. And, thankfully the movie has kind of found its own legs, and, people are talking about it regardless of the distribution, but I think that's really what it comes down to, is just the scale in which your films are presented. And especially now, Contracted's opened a lot of doors for me in terms of my career, where I've gotten an agent and I'm getting approached to do bigger films, and that's great. But now, now the question, so to speak, for me as a filmmaker is constantly what's going to work for me as a filmmaker in my career. What's kind of the next steps. So I have to be a little more careful about the types of films I make and my brand, so to speak. So that's always a tough one, because, as a filmmaker, you want to really tell the stories that pop up in your head, but it's like now I really have to be a lot more selective and choosy, which can add time onto an already arduous and long process, which is making a film. So now, as opposed to when I just have an idea pop in my head and I want to go and write it and make it and shoot it and just jump on it as quickly as possible. Now there's a lot more factors at play that I have to be aware of and consider, and that's probably what's been the toughest thing, and it kind of slows down the process a little bit. But I'm trying to find, once again, a balance of being able to do the films like Contracted, which was made completely outside of any sort of system or company, and was made completely independently, by myself and my team, and found success with that. So I'm trying to find that balance of being able to do the passion projects that I really love, and also the films that kind of help support my growing career for my agents and my representatives who have an interest in me. So just finding what works for everyone, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, a huge thank you to your team and yourself for Contracted. Really, really enjoyed it, loved it. So it's awesome. We were chatting about it. We've mentioned it a few times over the past few episodes of this show. I think it was Lauren, you mentioned it sort of in depth when you mentioned you'd done your YouTube review, and Eric had left a comment for you and stuff, so which then provoked us to try and get you on the show. So thank you for actually coming on it.
Yeah.
So it's much appreciated. You and I have swapped Facebook messages over the past few years, but it's fine. It's really nice to actually be able to have a conversation with you. So
yeah, absolutely. Same to you. Like I said, I'm honored that you want to have me on, and anytime you want me to chat about movies, I have more than enough shit to say.
Yeah.
Hell yes.
I'd love to know, Eric, what's your next plan? I know I saw a picture of a script you were working on for Sirens a while back. Is that the main project you've got going on at the minute, or what can we expect for you in the recent future?
It's tough to say what's coming up exactly next. The Sirens is something that I hope to be shooting this year. We were actually supposed to start shooting here in April, but we had a few issues that we had to push a little bit. And but that's the script I recently finished writing, and honestly, I'm really excited. It's one that I'm extremely, extremely passionate about. And it's unlike anything I've ever seen or even heard of, for that matter. So I'm excited for when I'm able actually to really get that one in front of the cameras, because it's gonna be fucking crazy and awesome. And that one's one that I'm really pushing hard for, and hopefully we'll have something on sooner rather than later. And then I've got a few things that are kind of circling, that are kind of behind the curtain. And I've got a film called Hellbent that I didn't write. Actually, it'll be one of the first films I direct that I didn't write. that's been circling for a while, and we're attaching the actors now. And as soon as we have the cast assembled, we're probably going to go into production pretty quickly. So, like I said, just really trying to find that balance of shifting around the schedule and finding time to make all the films that I feel really passionate about. And I just finished a script that's kind of like my Scream. Actually, it's a very whodunit thriller that those are probably my favorite types of films of all time. Like Scream is my favorite movie of all time, and I love films that are just fun and you don't know who the killer is, and it's like it's a guessing game the whole way through, and I just finished my first movie in that capacity, and we're going out with it. My agent and I are going out with it right now, so I'm hoping we'll find a good home for that and be shooting that sooner rather than later as well. But in terms of what to expect next, I could do everything from a horror comedy to another weird experimental horror film. So I don't know, but hopefully whatever I'm doing next, it'll be shooting very, very soon.
Brilliant.
And find time for another Trick or Treat film at some point around October.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely plan to have a Trick or Treater Part 3 out by October. So hopefully I'll have time to do that as well.
Nice. I shared those on Facebook the other day because I'd not seen them for a while, and friends of mine were like, "What's that?" So yeah, educating them all.
Oh, I appreciate it. Those are a lot of fun. I have some of the most fun making those for sure.
Any final questions, Steve?
Just, is there any genre that you wouldn't touch, that you would think that you would be completely
out of
the depth if you tried to touch it? Is there any genre that you would not touch? So, say, for instance, if somebody asked you to do a romantic drama, would you say, I haven't actually a clue how to go down that avenue with that, or an animated film or something like that?
I would probably say an animated film. I think, as much as I would love, I actually really love animated films, but I don't know if I have the patience to make one, to be honest with you, because it takes so long. But I love all genres. Like I even love musicals and comedies and dramas, and I would probably say animated films are probably, and short films for the most part. Like I just those are the ones that are the most foreign to me, even though I love quite a few of them. But yeah, I would definitely say an animated film, because everything else I feel like is in the spectrum of something that I would ultimately like to tackle at least once in my lifetime if I can.
No, there's no contracted cartoon series on the way then.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't plan on it.
Or a musical horror film like Repo the Genetic Opera.
Yeah, I could definitely do a musical. In fact, one of the films I'm most excited to see is a film that recently just came out here in the States called Stage Fright, which looks like Scream meets Glee, and I'm really excited about that.
That one looks like a lot of fun. Very excited for that one too.
Yeah.
But no, a huge thanks for coming on tonight, Eric. Or this afternoon, actually, where you are. It's the evening here, but it's afternoon where you are. So what are your plans for the rest of the day?
Probably gonna get some reading done, and then ultimately try and start writing on something. Probably, I'm a little bit of a workaholic, so I'm probably gonna get back to it, and then get ready for this week.
All right, so hopefully this hasn't been too painful for you.
No, absolutely not. Like I said, I was honored to come on, and anytime you want me back, just let me know. I'd love to.
And
awesome,
Contracted is available on DVD and Blu-ray, and also for US people or people who have hacked laptops. That'd be me. It's available on Netflix, so definitely check it out.
Yes, sir.
The From Page to Screen movie cast. So they have 9 times out of 10 they have to send it back to you unopened or just throw it in the garbage can.
Things don't always look exactly as we envision our life to look, but sometimes it works out and turns out even better.
Gregor Fisher, his Bacon number is 2 because he was appeared with January Jones in Love Actually, and January Jones and Kevin Bacon appeared in X-Men First Class together.
I've got to say, the very Harold and Kumar 3D Christmas, now that just makes me want to rush out.
It's about the acting, about the writing. That's really what theatre is for me.
Probably had more names than Prince or whatever. Never mind, there's a joke for the oldies. It'd be like, who's Prince? Who's he? I'd just like to see Mr. Freeze hiring his bad guys, going, right, okay, so you're a psycho, right, can you ice skate? Head over to iTunes, Spreaker and Stitcher and put in the search box From Page to Screen.
That was brilliant. He's such a nice, down-to-earth man as well. Like, he's brilliant.
It was nice to actually speak to somebody who knows the genre that he's working in, rather than somebody who's just there to pimp his film. He actually knows the horror genre, so it's nice to actually speak to somebody like that.
Exactly. But no, it's very cool. And people don't always focus on one movie. Like you say, The Tangent talks about films he used to watch as a child and where he's headed next. And just the only thing I ever struggle with when I'm doing interviews is I get so into listening to them talking, I forget that I've got to chip in and actually ask them something after they finish.
Yeah.
Well, he had very in-depth answers, so it was nice to actually get your mind to think, what am I going to ask after he's finished? And then all of a sudden, during his answer to the question that he's been previously asked, he answers the question that you've got in your mind. So you're thinking to yourself, I've got to come up with something else now, and you're struggling really badly to try and think of something else.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes you're too busy thinking of what you're going to say next rather than listening. So sometimes it's good to play back these shows and actually listen to it without the pressure.
I was going to properly ask him about James Wan, and then all of a sudden he mentioned James Wan and The Conjuring. I went, that was what I was going to ask him about. I'm going to have to try and rephrase what I was going to ask him about.
Yeah.